The Franklin expedition was an Arctic exploration led by John Franklin in 1845 that took two Royal Naval vessels, the Erebus and the Terror, to seek the Northwest Passage, which was a potential sea route from the Atlantic to the Pacific by going over the top of Canada. So what happened to the expedition and why has it become so famous? Well, the first thing to say is this wasn't some amateur attempt by a bunch of crackpots. Instead, this was a serious and well-funded mission carried out by naval officers with experience of Arctic conditions. The older of the two ships was the HMS Terror. It was a Napoleonic-era bomb ship being converted for Arctic exploration. Now, most naval ships of the Napoleonic era were equipped with purely direct-fire cannons. However, bomb ships also fired a high-trajectory mortar round, which if it hit the target could result in devastating damage. But in order to actually fire a mortar from a wooden vessel, the ship needed to have a very strong hull, so that the vessel was capable of resisting a massive recoil from the mortar. This meant that when it was converted for Arctic service, it had the required durability against the ice, and even when it was trapped in the ice for 10 months in an earlier expedition, it still remained serviceable. The Erebus was also a refitted bomb vessel, not as old as the Terror, and the Erebus was slightly larger than the Terror. Both vessels were sailing vessels, but they were also equipped with rather modest steam engines. Now, the captain, Sir John Franklin, was at the time of the expedition a rear admiral. He'd served in the Royal Navy for 40 years, including during the Napoleonic Wars. He led several Arctic expeditions before, including some extremely challenging conditions. Those challenging situations did lead him to ensure that future expeditions he went on were well planned and also well supplied. The steam engines on the naval vessels were a relatively new innovation. While they could move the ships fairly slowly, they could also provide the ships with heat as well as a fresh supply of fresh water. There were enough stores on board the ships, in theory, to last the crew for 3 years, and consisted of a combination of preserved and tinned food, which was supplemented at various stages along the route with more fresh supplies. Now, this should mean that even if the ships would become icebound for more than a season, there were enough supplies to keep the crew going. Now, John Franklin was on the Erebus, while the Terror was commanded by Francis Crozier, another experienced naval officer, again who'd been on a number of expeditions in the ice, including to the Antarctic as well as the Arctic. These two officers commanded crews in the Royal Navy with a small detachment of Royal Marines. There were some Arctic veterans among the crew, including 2 ice masters. However, most of the crew and junior officers had little previous experience of the ice. The vessel set sail from England via Greenland. The last confirmed sighting of the vessels was between Greenland and north of Canada in Baffin Bay. The expedition then disappeared, and a whole host of different searches were carried out both by land and by sea, with varying and mostly disappointing results. There were some local Inuits who reported having seen some of the crew, and also some graves and other traces of the party were found, including some writings. However, it wasn't until the 21st century that the vessels themselves were found. It's this mysterious loss of the ships and their crew, with so little evidence of them left behind, has meant that the story of their loss has become so famous. So what happened to the people on the mission, and how did it come to fail? Well, an early suspect was the lead in the food and steam power for the mission. The contract to supply the tin food was a relatively last-minute item, which meant that a large amount of tin food was prepared in a hurry, resulting in the lead seals on the tins being heavily applied and possibly contaminating the food with lead. In addition, the piping and tanks used for some of the steam power also used lead, which could again contaminated the water supply with more lead. Severe lead poisoning could then have resulted in the crew being vulnerable to other threats in the hostile environment and dying as a result. However, recent examinations of the bodies have shown that the bodies did contain levels of lead, but those levels had accumulated over their entire lives and didn't see a spike towards the end of their lives. In addition, lead poisoning results in a slow, rather gradual decline rather than a rapid deterioration, meaning that lead poisoning was unlikely to be a major factor in the deaths of the crew. Instead, Examinations of the body point towards conditions like scurvy, TB, pneumonia as the most likely curious cause of death. Curiously also, one of the things was they had very low levels of zinc in their systems. These do seem to indicate there was a significant problem with the food supply. The hurried nature of the preparation of the tinned food and the poor sealing could have combined with the heat and humidity produced by the steam engines, resulting in much of the preserved food becoming inedible, leaving only foods like cheese, ship's biscuits, and grains to eat. Now, these foods would have meant that what little nutrition the sailors were getting would be low in vitamin C and low in zinc. This means that the ship's crew were more likely to be suffering from malnutrition, which combined with the low levels of zinc and vitamin C would have seriously compromised their immune systems, leaving them more vulnerable to conditions like the TB and pneumonia. In addition, the cramped conditions on board the vessels would not have helped contain any outbreak of conditions like TB, and meant that the crew would be in a very bad shape. It seems that during 1847 ships had become stuck in the ice at least once. Later, they were possibly able to free up one ship before it became stuck again. However, both ships remained intact and were not crushed by the ice. On the 11th of June 1847, the leader, John Franklin, died, and Command passed to Francis Crozier. While they were stuck in the ice, 9 officers and 15 men lost their lives. Then, on the 26th of April 1848, with food supplies now running critically low, the remaining 105 men left alive, led by Francis Crozier, now set off on an overland march southwards in hope of following the course of Back River, heading generally southwards towards civilization and safety. This was a desperate thing to attempt, since the sailors were ill-equipped and untrained in travelling in the harsh, icy conditions, and now their poor physical condition at this stage meant it was virtually doomed to fail. It's possible that some of the crew may have been able to march 250 miles towards safety before succumbing to the conditions, disease, and starvation. However, that appears to be the closest any of them made it to safety, and none of the members of the Franklin expedition survived to tell what really happened on the journey.